The recent judgment by the Supreme Court, siding with an appeal from the anti-trans activist group for Women Scotland, has sent shockwaves through the trans and non-binary community. It's also unleashed a tidal wave of gloating from anti-trans so-called gender-critical organisations and the right-wing media, who've been relentless in their campaign of vilification against trans people. Their banner headline screams with triumph, "Trans women are not women." But across the country, members of the trans community are feeling hurt, panic, but also deep, fiery rage. Demonstrations have sprung up in cities all over the UK at a moment's notice. In London alone, around 20,000 people gathered in Parliament Square before marching to a rally in St James's Park. At these gatherings, the anger and defiance were tangible, and much of it rightly was aimed at the Labour government, which has so far shown no inclination to step in and amend the law or challenge the negative implications of the court's decision. This failure follows Wes Streeting's utter betrayal of trans adolescents, shown when he embraced the biased and unscientific Cass review and supported banning the use of puberty blockers. Now more than ever, socialists must stand in solidarity with trans workers and the broader trans community, demanding equality, dignity and respect. The case itself was about an act passed by the Scottish Parliament to increase the representation of women on public boards. Its wording matched the UK's Gender Recognition Act of 2004, which states that where a gender recognition certificate has been issued, that person becomes, for all purposes, the acquired gender. This means that trans women could be included under quotas for women board members, a point two lower courts upheld before the Supreme Court overturned it last week. This defeat, which was initially obscure, now has much wider consequences. The court's ruling defined woman under the Equality Act 2010 as referring exclusively to biological women. In practice, this could mean that measures intended to prevent discrimination against women, like equal pay claims, might now apply only to biological women, including trans women with gender recognition certificates. And worse still, some are interpreting this judgment as a blanket legal statement that woman can only ever mean biological woman in all contexts. It's a highly dangerous interpretation. And it's no wonder that trans people and intersex people are deeply fearful, worrying that all their hard-won rights could be stripped away. Incredibly, not a single trans organisation or individual was allowed to give evidence to the court. The judgment has emboldened efforts to impose blanket bans on trans women who live their lives entirely as women, from using women's spaces like toilets, changing rooms, prisons, refuges, and hospital wards. But there is no credible evidence that allowing trans women access to these facilities increases risks to anyone. The NHS has reported no complaints about trans women on female wards. What it has had are endless complaints about patients of all genders being stuck on trolleys in corridors. Women's refuges are far more concerned about brutal funding cuts from cash-strapped local authorities than they are about trans women. Trans women have been using women's toilets for decades. Predatory men don't need to pretend to be trans to assault women. And only around a dozen trans women, after full risk assessments, are in women's prisons, while trans women placed in men's prisons face horrific violence and sexual assault. The Equality Act already allowed the exclusion of trans people from some spaces if it was a proportionate way of resolving a legitimate issue. What it didn't permit was a blanket ban. But what's happening now isn't about trans people demanding new rights or overreaching. It's a deliberate, calculated attempt to strip away rights they've held since 2004 and 2010, rights that were themselves hard-won after a 2002 ruling by the European Court of Human Rights. The right-wing sections of the ruling class, egged on by media outlets like the Daily Telegraph, the Spectator and the Daily Mail, want to turn back the clock on decades of social progress. Their ideological commitment to sexism and rigid gender roles serves capitalism's interest by helping divide the working class and derail movements towards socialism at a time of crisis, inequality and instability. They see trans people as an easy target now, but they made it clear they plan to come for lesbian, gay, bisexual people and women's rights too, especially rights around abortion. We only have to glance across the Atlantic to see the horror unfolding in Trump's USA, where groups like the Heritage Foundation, the brains behind Project 2025, have driven monstrous attacks on women and LGBT people. These same organisations fund and ally with UK transphobes, tightly linked to right-wing think tanks. The idea that these reactionaries care about defending women's rights is laughable. And tragically, they found some allies among a small but vocal minority of self-declared radical feminists who harbour a deep ideological hostility to trans people, especially trans women. This ideology isn't new, it stretches back to the early 1980s and aims to eliminate transgenderism altogether. And sadly, it has even found footholds in sections of the Labour movement. But their so-called concern for trans people is pure cynicism. They whip up baseless fears and exaggerate hypothetical risks to manufacture a climate of hostility against a small and mostly invisible community. And to its shame, the Starmer-led Labour Party has folded completely to the right-wing agenda again. Bridget Phillipson, Labour's so-called equality spokesperson, bluntly told Parliament that trans women will be forced into male toilets, changing rooms and prisons. Starmer himself, after years of trying to evade the question, now looks even more dishonest and absurd, claiming the judgment proves clarity when it absolutely does not. The court didn't define biological sex at all, it simply called it self-explanatory, despite the fact that nearly 2% of the population are intersex and biological sex is far from straightforward. How is biological sex going to be determined now? Genital inspections? Who will be challenged? It's a green light for the harassment of trans people and any cis people who don't fit rigid gender stereotypes. And Starmer's plan to hide behind the EHRC's guidance is a betrayal too. The EHRC was gutted under the Tories, and its chair, Baroness Faulkner, has made her anti-trans bias pretty crystal clear. Labour MPs must be pressured to act to amend the law and restore trans people's rights. Further legal challenges are inevitable, but in the end, trans workers will have to rely on their own strength and on the solidarity of the entire labour and trade union movement. Virtually every trade union has clear policy supporting trans rights, but union branches must step up now. Trans and non-binary members must not be abandoned by the labour movement. They must not be left to fight this battle alone. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and head on over to www.lefthorizons.com to subscribe to the newsletter and read the full article over there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.